The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Everybody, and welcome to the first edition of A Bitter Cup of Coffee, the podcast. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the host of the podcast and the author of the book, A Bitter Cup of Coffee, Mr. Doug Gladstone. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, my friend. How are you today?
I can't complain at all. I'm excited for you. This is the maiden edition, as it were, and I am excited for the network. You've got an awful lot to offer. You've been a guest a number of times, and your cause, your life work is absolutely up our alley. We're humanists, and we believe simply in what is fair. And I'm offering you the platform. So if you would be so kind as to tell the audience what it is that got you into this in the first place, and how a bittersweet cup of coffee, not sweet, a bitter cup of coffee, came to be. Doug Gladstone.
Well, first of all, I want to welcome everyone who's downloading this podcast for the first time. And since it's the first podcast, hopefully that's a lot of you. I invite you all to come back for future programs and listen to Ralph and I and all of our guests talk about an issue that, as Ralph has correctly said, has meant a lot to me. Again, my name is Doug Gladstone, otherwise referred to at the 12 East 49th Street offices of the Major League Baseball Players Association and the 245 Park Avenue offices of Major League Baseball as public enemy number one. You see, as Ralph knows, I have taken up a cause that you probably have not read about. You probably have not heard anything about it because there are, in my opinion, not as many sports columnists or bloggers or broadcast journalists writing or talking about it. This is an issue that when I do author events, people's jaws drop. They look really confused, and they say, how come we've never heard about this? Well, I'm the only one. I shouldn't really say that, but lately, thanks to Ralph and many of his other program hosts, we're articulating, we're getting the word out, we're spreading the message, we're raising consciousness. So our army is growing steadfastly and strongly. But here's the issue in a nutshell. And by the way, I won't feel bad and Ralph won't feel bad if you don't subscribe necessarily. You could please subscribe to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, but if you don't subscribe to this point of view, that's okay.
Please talk to us about it on Facebook and explain your view, and perhaps we're not clarifying the issue if that happens. We want communication, good, honest communication, and Doug didn't say it, but it's imperative that whether or not you back us up, share with your friends that we're out there and give them the opportunity to contribute to what's right, what's wrong. You know, their view is just as important as any. So help us spread the word. We love to debate it if that's an issue, and if you're coming to us with a good spirit, we'd love to talk to you. And so communicate with Doug or I on Facebook on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network site or our personal sites. We just want to get the word out there, whatever it takes. And Doug has, this is your life, Doug. This is something I see you posting. I see you posting articles. I see you referring to people. Our first guest, as an example, will be Tom Johnson, a fellow who is a preacher. And he is one of those who meet the criteria of concern. Let's put it that way.
And let me tell our listeners what that concern is. Because,
yes, we've been holding out.
They may not even, they might have already forgotten about this program and what the central mission is.
Exactly.
The mission, folks, is as follows. There are 644 men, retired men, who played at the highest level of the national pastime. They played Major League Baseball, but believe it or not, they do not get pensions from having played the game that they love. And also, did you know, maybe you didn't, that there are an additional 215 men who don't get any monies because they had under 43 game days of service in Major League Baseball. Now, that's not 43 appearances. That's 43 game days on a bench. For your edification, as well, that's a fancy word. To clarify, Justin Verlander or last year's AL Cy Young Award winner Corey Kluber will have 43 game days of service, but in those 43 game days, he's only going to the mound 8 times. He's not getting 8 game days of service credit. He's getting 43. So I always want you to remember that fact. The men who I have, pardon the pun, gone to bat for, they don't have the 4 years of service credit required. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson, ladies and gentlemen. The Players' Pension Fund was first established. Ralph, do you know this?
I know it all.
You do know it all?
You taught me.
I did. Well, thank you. No fooling, folks. It was April 1st, 1947, and you needed 5 years of service to be eligible to collect a pension and health insurance. And then in 1969, that threshold was lowered to 4 years of service. So the men that the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network hosts, and yours truly in particular, have waged a fight for, to do right for, they are individuals who had more than 43 game days of service credit, but less than 4 years. Now, that 43 game days is roughly a quarter of a season. So you do the math. If you're a call up in mid-August and you stay on the bench and you ride the pines, you just ride the pines till the end of the season for 6 weeks, you're going to get a pension. Now, it may not be the biggest pension in the world, but you're going to get a pension. So you might ask yourself, well, Doug, I don't understand. Someone like the former Cleveland Indian and Milwaukee Brave fourth outfielder, pinch hitter deluxe, Don Dillard of South Carolina, who had 3 years and 143 game days worth of service credit. How is it possible he's not getting a pension? Why is Don Dillard not receiving a pension, but a man like Tim Wood, and I don't have anything against Tim Wood, I've never met the man. Tim Wood, who pitched parts of 3 seasons for the Florida Marlins and the Pittsburgh Pirates in 2008, 2009, and 2010, Tim Wood made a grand total of 57 appearances in 58 games that he appeared in. Pardon me, what did I just
58 game days, you mean?
No, what I meant was he made 57 appearances, and he only had 58 innings, lifetime innings that he pitched. He gets a pension, but Don Dillard does not. Now, to stay with pitchers, let me give you my favorite example. Rich Hinton. Rich Hinton, married to Rita Hinton, has 6 children. That's neither here nor there. But Rich Hinton had 3 tours of duty with the Chicago White Sox, and he also pitched for the Cincinnati Reds, the Texas Rangers, the Seattle Mariners, and the New York Yankees. Rich Hinton threw 249 and 2/3 innings. He appeared in 119 games, a lot more than Tim Wood did. Now, the reason why I mention this is because they're both from Arizona. They're both Arizona natives. In fact, they both attended the same high school. But Tim Wood, because he played after 1980, and Rich Hinton did not play from 1980 on, he played prior to 1980. Tim Wood's getting the pension. Rich Hinton is not. Now, Ralph.
Well, let me give you a breath. Let me give you a breath, and I'll tell you the things about the way it's set up that gall me.
I have to give one more history lesson to our listeners.
All right.
It's critical. So you may ask, okay, well, what happened? 1980 seems to be the demarcation line. What happened in 1980 to change things? I'm glad you asked that, listener. Because over the 1980 Memorial Day weekend, there was a threatened strike. The players were going to set to go out on strike. The hot-button issue of the time, as it normally was back then, was the compensation to clubs, to the owners, for free agents. And they were prepared, the leaders of the union at the time, being the late Marvin Miller, his then counsel, Don Fear, and the National League player representative, a fellow by the name of Steve Rogers. Great pitcher, by the way. Great pitcher for the Montreal Expos. I give that man his due. He was a great pitcher. As a person, however, there's a reason why none of the Montreal Expo beat writers cast a vote for Steve Rogers when it came time for him to be on the Hall of Fame ballot. But we'll talk more about Steve Rogers and his boss, Tony Clark, a bit later. So, the late... Look, Ralph is laughing. We always like to make Ralph laugh. But this is not a laughing matter, unfortunately.
Well, I'll tell you, I know why you're laughing. There's 2 sides to it. You know, when the writers, and this brings up a totally different subject, let me digress for a second. When the writers don't give a player votes based on their personality, and some deserve, some not. And I think of Schilling as a perfect example. that's not fair either. So,
It's not fair, but listen, the worst thing I can say about Curt Schilling is that he has some pretty far out opinions that are totally contrary to mine. Did his business go belly up? Yes. But is he a good person? I think he is. He's raised a lot of money for, I believe, the Alzheimer's Association, and my late mother, rest her soul, passed away from Alzheimer's. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I give Curt Schilling a pass on that. I won't give Steve Rogers and his boss Tony Clark a pass, but that'll be apparent later on. So to bring us back to that critical weekend in 1980, the late Ray Greeby, who, if you recall, was the air traffic controller in the Reagan administration at one point in time, the late Ray Greeby goes to the late Marvin Miller and Don Spear and Steve Rogers and the AL Players representative, Sal Bando, and he says, listen, we don't want this strike to occur. So I'm going to make you an offer that in true Vito Corleone fashion you can't refuse. You know that 4 years vesting requirement for a pension and for health insurance? Forget about it, as they say in Brooklyn, New York. Forget about it.
In Jackson Heights, too, sometimes.
In Jackson Heights, too. And ladies and gentlemen, just let me tell you that Ralph Zig Tyko and I were both proud alumni. Is it alumnus or alumni? No, we're two people, so it's alumni.
If we can't spell it, it must be junior high school.
Yes. Joseph Pulitzer Intermediate School 145 in Jackson Heights, New York.
It's the best school I ever attended, I got to tell you. It's tremendous.
I'll say that because it brought you and I together.
Okay.
But be that as it may. So Mr. Greeby says, I'm going to lower that threshold down to, believe it or not, 1 game day on a roster. You just sit on the pines, and you know what's going to happen, fellas? All your members are going to be eligible to buy into the league's premier health insurance plan.
For life.
And for life. And you know what also I'm going to do? Remember that magic number? 43? Okay? I'm going to lower from 4 years to 43 game days what you need to be eligible for a pension. Well, Fear turns to Bando, Bando turns to Steve Rogers, Rogers looks at Miller. In a nutshell, how can we refuse? And it's been that way ever since. All you've needed since 1980 is 1 game day. Just ride the pines, be the 25th man on the bench, and you're eligible to buy into the league's premier health insurance plan. And like I alluded to earlier, all you need to be eligible to get a monthly benefit allowance, a.k.a. a pension, is 43 game days on an active roster. It's been that way ever since 1980. But see, in their excitement, in their overjoyment to accept this plan, the late Mr. Miller and Mr. Bando and Mr. Rogers and Mr. Fear, who, by the way, Ralph, do you know what he got as a going-away present when he retired from the Players Union? Do you know what he got?
No.
Most people would be content with a gold watch. He got a $19 million buyout. And you know who the union president was at the time? If there are any Toronto Blue Jay fans out there, I want you to know that Curtis Granderson's been the president of the Major League Baseball Players Association, a.k.a. Players Union, for a very long time. You've now got a man who publicly said, well, when we looked at what Commissioner Bud Selig was making and what Don Fear wasn't making, we decided to give him a nice going-away gift. $19 million. That's a heck of a going-away gift. could have paid for a lot of pensions. Don't you think there, Ralph?
Well, I don't know if he was the one that negotiated the sweet deals that they had in the first place.
He was the one who announced it. He announced it publicly.
Well, no, I meant negotiating of the sweet deals they got on the pension itself. In other words, it may not have been 43 days were it not for Don Fear.
Correct.
So.
All right. So the
bottom line is there's $2 billion in their funds. There's enough money for everybody.
Wait a minute. You're talking about where we're jumping ahead of the gun. There's $2.8 billion, almost $3 billion in the Players' Welfare and Benefits Fund. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The four horsemen of the Acropolis, Miller and Fear and Bando and my buddy boy Rogers, they just forgot one important thing. They forgot to make that great sweetheart deal that Ray Greeby offered them, retroactive, so that the men like Don Dillard or Carmen Fanzone or Rich Hinton or George the Stork Theodore, that they could all be eligible for a pension as well. So, I write a book. I come upon this, by the way. People may say, well, how did you hear about this issue if no one's writing about it? Pretty good question.
That is.
Why didn't my producer ask that? Okay, my producer's heard it. That's not fair. So there I am in 2009, sitting home, feeling very full of myself. I had just published my first national article in the Chicago Sun-Times, and my wife, of course, calls me on things, and she says, okay, you're pretty full of yourself. What are you going to do for an encore? And I didn't rightly know, but what I did know was that in 2009, that was the 40th anniversary of what people in New York called the Imperfect Game, the night when a little-known, unheralded, obscure rookie, who is only playing, by the way, because the regular center fielder of the Chicago Cubs got into the doghouse, not the dugout, but the doghouse of the late Ron Santo and the late Leo DeRocha the day before, when he missed a couple of balls in the outfield during a crucial July series between the Mets and the Cubs. His name was Don Young. So this little-known obscure rookie, Jimmy Qualls, lines a clean single between the late Tommy Agee and Cleon Jones, and Tom Seaver, who was carrying a perfect game into the top of the ninth inning. He got Randy Hundley on a comebacker to the mound, and after 25 batters, this little-known obscure rookie, Jimmy Qualls, lines this clean single, and the perfect game and the no-no go bye-bye. And, of course, the New York Mets hadn't ever had they've never had a perfect game. They've had a no-no. It's officially credited to Johan Santana, but anyone who really follows baseball has to admit that Carlos Beltran smacked a double that hugged the left field line. It got chalk, but it got the inside of the third base bag, and I don't really truthfully believe that Johan Santana, 155 pitches later, threw a no-hitter. But in the record books, it's an official no-hitter. So,
okay.
In any event,
in any event, because I go back to 1969, I know.
You know about Jimmy Qualls.
Yes, I do, and I was a Met fan, and I just want to say it's easy. It would have been easy to piss off Leo DeRocha, but I don't know the story of how Don Young pissed off Ron Santo, the most good-natured guy in the world.
Well, he was a hot-headed guy. He was, yes. To a legion of Cubs fans who have heard the man, God rest his soul, call Cub games, he was a saint. But as a player, oh my God, you wanted him in the trenches with you. You really did.
I didn't know that.
And oh my gosh, yes. And this fellow Don Young made two really, really bonehead plays. You've heard of Fred Merkel, and how, when you commit a Merkel, it's a bonehead play. Well, Don Young committed two Merkels in the opening game of this series that the Mets swept. In any event, so I'm thinking, okay, it's the 40th anniversary of the imperfect game. Let me pitch this to Baseball Digest, and sure enough, Bob Kunster, who's still at the helm of that great publication.
Loved Baseball Digest as a kid.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Well, he commissions me to write the story, and I'm having a series of interviews over a couple of days with Jimmy Qualls, and just like Ralph and I are doing right now, very innocuously, very innocently, Jimmy Qualls just says to me, Doug, I had a good career in the show. I wish it was longer, but I'm happy I fulfilled my lifelong dream. The only thing that I'm really perturbed about, well, he didn't say perturbed, but basically what Ralph said, pissed off. The only thing that I'm PO'd about is that I don't get a pension. I said, what are you talking about? What do you mean you don't get a pension? Doesn't everyone get a pension? And he said, no, not everyone gets a pension. It's because I played before 1980. I said, well, what does 1980 have to do with it? Look it up. And basically, the very long-winded introduction of this debut podcast explained why the Jimmy Qualls, the Rich Hintons, the David Clydes, the Gary Nybauers, the George Stork Theodores. Let's name a couple of San Francisco Giants, because I know that's where Ralph
I'm living out here in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco. And
well, then, have you ever heard of a nice...
How about Jimmy Driscoll? There's a
Jimmy Driscoll, who was a Texas Ranger in Oakland Athletic. Don Taussig, who resides in Florida like Mr. Hinton. But Don Taussig played for the San Francisco Giants, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Houston Colt 45s. And I know everyone's going to know that the Houston Colt 45s is a precursor to the Houston Astros, because I believe Mr. Ralph Zig Tyko interviewed one of the greatest people you'd ever want to meet. And if I ever go out to Tacoma, Washington, I want to meet this man because Aaron Pointer, in addition to being a quality guy, Aaron Pointer is a diversity pioneer. Aaron Pointer was the first head lineman in the Pac-10. He became an NFL referee, and he's just a quality individual. But he is among the African American persons of color who are being taken advantage of by Major League Baseball. There are some other ones. Wayne Cage of the Cleveland Indians. Kuno Barrigan, who was inducted into the Mexican Hall of Fame. He was a Chicago Cubs catcher. I'm sure all of our friends in Illinois remember Kuno Barrigan.
And in Sacramento, he sells insurance up there for Cal State Insurance Company, as a matter of fact.
Still going strong at the ripe old age of 85.
Whoa.
Dave Roberts.
Whoa.
No, not the Los Angeles Dodgers manager, but Dave Roberts, who hails from Panama, who was a teammate in Double-A ball of Brooks Robinson. And you know who Brooks Robinson is besides, arguably the greatest third baseman in the history of the game? Brooks Robinson is also the president and chairman of the board of the Major League Baseball Players Alumni Association. And Brooks Robinson, because we were an equal opportunity point fingers that kind of individual, Ralph and I. All right? Brooks Robinson and the ridiculous. Major League Baseball Players Alumni Association. You would think their big mission in life would be to go to bat for impoverished alumni, because many of these men are mortgaging their homes, are going bankrupt, are incredibly ill with no health coverage. And would you think that...
We are back. A bitter cup of coffee. The podcast. Here is the man himself, Doug Gladstone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening. Or, we're talking about podcasts that can be downloaded at any time. So our listeners, Zig, they may be listening to us at 7:30 in the morning or at 12 noon while they're having lunch. So I really shouldn't be saying good evening, but yes, we are recording this in the evening.
In the evening, and actually in California, you're back east. I'm out in California. I don't know where you guessed. Tim, where you from?
You know what? It works better if you call him Tom, since that is his name. But
okay.
we digress for a minute. Let me properly introduce our guest.
If you would.
Thank you very kindly. I appreciate that, Zig. And welcome everybody to this second episode of A Bitter Cup of Coffee, the podcast. We trust that you enjoyed the first one. Obviously, if you did, you're back for another 30 minutes of pain. But if you're a new listener, we appreciate it, and we hope you continue to come and partake of this podcast every so often, and all the offerings of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Depending upon when you are downloading this episode, it's either perhaps right before March 30th or right after March 30th. And that's a significant date in terms of Holy Week, because this will all make sense to you in a moment. It's a very ham-handed segue. March 30th not only is Good Friday, but it is also what members of the tribe, and I am Jewish, and so is Ralph, we would call Erev Passover. So Ralph, as an interfaith person in an interfaith relationship, at least at my home, I celebrate both holidays. I put a chocolate bunny on a plate, and my daughter eats Streitz matzah together with it. And, when you melt the bunny, it's really
Streitz
good.
matzah and the chocolate bunny.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about what I got going in terms of celebration. Doug, I honest to God celebrate every day as if it were a holiday, and I bless the people who I'm Jewish by culture. I don't really celebrate holidays per se, except for Purim, which is a festive holiday, and of course Hanukkah. But I respect.
Well, here is a man.
Celebrate
I'm
Passover,
so sorry. Go ahead.
Anything they celebrate. And I just want to wish everybody out there a happy week, because it's one of those weeks when all of our faiths come together in one way or the other, and we could all experience Mishigas at the same time.
Spoken very nicely. But that is a very good segue to a man who knows a lot about blessings. For those of you who perhaps do not know, there have been a few pitchers in Major League Baseball history. Darcy Fast was on the back end of the 1968 Chicago Cubs rotation. He was going to be the fifth starter for 1969, but he did his tour of duty in Vietnam, and then subsequently had a higher calling. And 37 years later, he finally retired as the chief spiritual leader of the Centralia Community Church of Washington. We don't have Darcy on the phone. However, we have a native of St. Paul who attended St. Paul Murray High School, who really, as a pitcher, it's quite a resume that our first. By the way, this is our first premier ever guest, Zig. So we're appealing to the Lord to maybe bless our show.
Well, the Lord should have stepped in and said, "Can you teach the Jewish kid Tim from Tom?" So
yeah,
already
already you're going to hockey stick. But our first guest appeared in 129 games, all but one of them in relief for his hometown Twins over a span of 5 years, from 1974 to 1978. In 273 and a third innings, he won 23 games and had a very, very sterling earned run average of 3.39. Subsequently, he, for 17 years, did pastoral care and led the adult Christian education program at the Church of the Open Door in Crystal, Minnesota. He later received his Master's of Divinity at Bethel Seminary in San Diego. It is our great pleasure to welcome to this podcast former Minnesota Twins pitcher Tom Johnson. Not Tim, Tom Johnson. Tom, how are you today?
I'm great, Doug. Thank you. Thanks for that warm and very kind introduction.
No,
I will always be embarrassed, Tom Johnson.
Ralph, that's okay. There's a Tim Johnson who played for the Brewers and maybe other teams as well. So it gets confusing.
Was he a shortstop, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
And a minor.
But there was nothing.
Manager.
I'm so sorry, gentlemen. There was nothing confusing about what has happened to Tom Johnson. Tom is one of the 644 living men who receive what Ralph and I and others on this network have constantly called a bone, a reparation, blood money. They are the ones receiving a whopping $625 for every 43 game days, of service that they accrued on a major league roster. We're not going to talk financials, but let's put it this way. It has been reported that, and not by me, it has been reported that the minimum pension for someone who played after 1980 is $34,000. There are a lot of people who dispute that figure. Dan Foster of the Major League Baseball Players Alumni Association says, well, no, Gladstone's wrong. Whatever information he's getting and where he's attributing it to, the money he should be saying is they get a minimum pension for 43 game days of service of $5,000 and change. You know what? Whatever it is, it's a real pension. It's not what Tom Johnson and the 643 other men are receiving. And by the by, and I know Tom's work transcends money, because if you did not know, Tom and his wife Debbie reside in Bratislava, and they run the nonprofit Good Sports International in Slovakia. So, they could do well by helping the future generation and taking care of a lot of perhaps children who need the money more than maybe others here in the States. So, Pastor Johnson, I ask you, I'm sure I read somewhere once about fair play and kindness and helping those who are less fortunate. being pretty important character traits. So what do you think of the hand that you've been dealt by Major League Baseball and the Major League Baseball Players Association?
Well, it's an unfortunate situation that, if the money wasn't there to repair the injustice, I would say, well, I understand. But it seems that the money is there to do something for the players that are in the category that I fall in. I know they've gone back and they've done some reparations for the Negro Leagues and the players that came out of the Negro Leagues, and that was an injustice that needed to be done. It was a very important thing to do. But it seems like the group that I fall into is kind of caught in between the lucrative pension and medical benefits that are accessible to players who I think you said have 43 days of service, and the generation that preceded us. But we're caught in the middle, and it's unfortunate. And like I said, if there wasn't the resources to repair this, I would understand. But there seems to be, and it seems to be an oversight and something that, from the standpoint of fairness, justice, mercy, character qualities that I think are invited by our Creator for all of us to join in, it just doesn't seem like that's in play.
Yep, no truer words were ever spoken. Wouldn't you agree there, Zig?
Well, let me step in and tell you what I told you on the first podcast, what I feel is the greatest injustice. Haven't met you, Tom, and I haven't met your wife, and I don't know or care personally what you're getting individually as the bone that the Player Association is throwing you guys. But the fact that if you pass away, your wife will get Zippo Zero galls me more than anything going. And if you could elaborate on that, Doug, and get that point across to those who haven't heard my rant on the first show, it's very important, and it would make me happy to know that I'm not the only one that feels that what they're doing is misogynistic. It's against women.
Yeah, it's not only misogynistic, but we're talking about the mere fact that spousal benefits pass when the man passes is not only just cruel, but it's mean-spirited. It's callous. One of the other hosts on this network, our mutual friend Tony D'Angelo, says it's really callous. And we don't know,
but God sake, it's Harry Callis.
Yeah. For no other reason that our time here on this planet is limited. So if it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature, it's certainly not a good idea to upset a man of the cloth. And I couldn't help but think back recently when I learned that the widow of a Pirates pitcher named Kurt Radon, who survived him after 57 years of marriage, the payment was taken away from her. And I just don't know how either Commissioner Rob Manfred or MLB Union Executive Director Tony Clark look at each other or look at one another in the mirror every morning that they wake up or before they go to bed. So, I have some real problems with people who are not showing compassion and humanity. And obviously our guest today is full of compassion and humanity. So I'm going to ask him this. In the rough and tumble world of baseball, I know the Cleveland Indians ran a Bible study class. What did the Minnesota Twins do, perhaps, for the for the years you were on. Maybe
well,
you ran the.
There was a former Detroit sports writer by the name of Watson Spolstra who had had an experience that kind of transformed his life, and he went on to form what was called Baseball Chapel. And each club, when I was in the major leagues, had a chaplain, so to speak, who would conduct an opportunity for players that were interested to explore, maybe bigger questions about life than just baseball. Let's put it that way. And it was very, I think, well attended. It depended on the team and how many people were interested in that. But it was an opportunity to come aside and talk a little bit about things that are going to help guide your life, long after baseball is over. And there were a number of people interested in that, so it was a good experience.
Great. Now, the question that I don't have to ask, but I'm personally interested. I know at the outset I alluded to Darcy Fast. Darcy told me, and I read his book, and I wholeheartedly advise any of our listeners to go get a copy of it. It's called The Missing Cub. Darcy told me that his experience in Nam really shaped his desire to do good works, and that's why he became a pastor. So, without sounding too sycophantic, why did you get the calling?
Well, that's a good question. It kind of called me. I didn't really make a choice. I was recruited to work with young people at a church that was going through a difficult time, and then shortly after that found itself without someone to lead the congregation, and I'd been working with the youth and doing a pretty good job, so they invited me to become the interim. I did that for 4 years, and we went through some really crazy times, and my wife and I looked at each other after 4 years and thought, well, if this didn't disillusion us and destroy us, then maybe we're cut out for this. And so I went away and got a Master of Divinity degree, and kind of invested the rest of my life in doing what I would say is very similar to coaching. It's very much a coaching where you're working with people to help them improve their skills, in this case life skills, and opening themselves up to a bigger story that's going on around them. And that was our calling. It sort of called me, I guess you'd say.
Well, I hope, and if they're listening, or if they find out about you having come on the podcast, I hope they heed this. I hope LeVar Neal and Mike Berardino, who are both with the St. Paul Pioneer Express, your hometown paper back in the States, I hope they do a column on you, because, my beseeching and my reaching out and my efforts to get you some publicity in that major paper has fallen on deaf ears. And, I have a theory. Ralph subscribes to it. One of our other friends, Hal Bach, the former Associated Press sports writer, and Mark Weiss, one of the other co-hosts on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, they subscribe to it. And maybe you could weigh in on this. And really, in a nutshell, it's as follows: that most sports writers and newspaper columnists, and I put Mr. Neal and Mr. Berardino in this category, are so petrified of, and please don't take offense if I say pissing off or POing, POing the Major League Baseball and the Players Union for fear that the clubs will rescind their media credentials, that they refuse to write about this. What is your instinct? I don't even know whether or not how much sports journalism has changed between when you played and now with all the various multi-social media platforms there are, but I am partial to the good old days when you had, investigative journalism. I have often said I'm lobbing softballs at these sports writers, and they're not swinging at it. And I would think, if it's a question of performance-enhancing drugs, they all get on the bandwagon. But they hear pensions, and they do not want to broach this with their readers. They don't want to write about it. They don't want to report about it. And they sure don't want, with very few exceptions, they sure don't want to take on the league, the clubs, the alumni association, or the players union.
That's interesting. I don't know what to say about that. I know from my experience that back in the days when players weren't making a lot of money and we had to work jobs in the off season, I joined a bowling league in the off season with the sports writers and some of the players. We hung out together. We talked about stuff. Nothing seemed to be off limits. Of course, they were pretty discreet about players' indiscretions on the road and things like that. But I don't think they were beholden to anyone back then, and they felt the freedom to write what they wanted to write. But I don't know how that's changed today. I would imagine that with it becoming a big business and dealing with people players who probably have their own lawyers along with their nutritionists, they have to walk a little bit more carefully, both with the league and with the players. I don't know that to be a fact. We do have a sports writer up here who has done, he does a radio program as well as columns periodically. He's an old beat writer, Patrick Royce. And Patrick and I go back to when we used to bowl together, and he seems to be more free to, expound on things that he doesn't think are fair, and he's a good writer. So I would think maybe the beat writer's not the way to go, but if you can find some of the columnists who are writing for the paper who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty a little bit and, piss people off, that might be the way to go.
You might approach columnists that aren't necessarily sports columnists that will look
or
at
who have a background in sports, have graduated into a columnist, Yeah,
some of my most successful tear sheets come from business writers. So there's a lot of truth into what you said, and Zig, make sure we we find out Patrick Royce's email address because we are having an upcoming roundtable on sports columnists and how they've covered.
He'd be a good one. He's a good, solid writer with a real sense of history. He'd be worth pulling in.
Great.
Terrific.
I thank you for that.
Terrific.
Yeah.
I just want to get to know Tom a little bit from his baseball career, so we can get an idea of who you are as a person, as a ball player, and what you came from, so to speak.
Go ahead. Step up to the plate.
Well, I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. I grew up at a time.
Initially, who signed you?
Angelo Giuliani was a scout for the Minnesota Twins.
Okay.
I'd gone through high school and Legion ball, playing for the smallest high school in St. Paul, at a time when Dave Winfield was growing up. We're the same age, and we played against each other since I was a small kid.
Wow.
And I had pretty good success against Dave all along the way, but that was the era I grew up in. Following Dave and myself came Jack Morris, and then shortly after Jack was Paul Molitor. And so we had actually four of us from St. Paul in the major leagues at one time before I had my injury. Three of them in the Hall of Fame. I'm the odd man out. So St. Paul produced a few good players, but back then, growing up in St. Paul, where we had 12 games for our high school season and maybe 20, 24, 25 games for our Legion summer season, there wasn't a whole lot of dreaming about Major League Baseball.
How
I
did
played
you get
three
the
other
attention
sports.
of the scout?
Two other sports. I played football,
scout find you?
basketball. What's that?
How did you get the attention of the scout, and how did he find you?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I'd been scouted pretty heavily in high school, and during the summer, our team won the first city championship, and then our Legion team won its first ever championship, and I was a pitcher. But I was skinny, and I was young, and I grew up in Minnesota where we didn't play many games, and so everybody was encouraging me to go to college. I had a scholarship at the University of Minnesota to go play baseball with Dave Winfield, who was going there. And I was looking forward to that. But then I got invited to come out to the Twins and throw batting practice. I'd had to miss a tryout camp where they had 300 players come out and try out. I had to miss that because of an injury. But I ended up at the ballpark, personal invitation from Angela Giuliani, and I pitched a couple times through batting practice, came back, did it again. They started offering me a little money. First of all, a scholarship, then a little money. Eventually, it was enough money to where I thought, I'm doing good in school. I'd like to go get a college degree, but the opportunity to play professional ball doesn't come along very often, and I'm going to give it a shot. So I signed for $5,000 in a college scholarship and went off to play baseball. And at that time, no dream. I jokingly say I didn't ever have a dream to play Major League Baseball. I might have fantasized about it, but there was no sense of reality about it coming from this place. And knowing what I know now, I feel very differently. But at that time,
in the minors, and how did he affect you?
I had a good. Well, it's funny because in high school I never had a baseball coach. In a high school baseball coach, he was a football player who needed the job. But he was a good guy. He encouraged me, gave me a lot of articles to read. So my first coach was my second year of ball. His name was Fred Waters. And he's a pitcher who had played a little bit in the major leagues, but very, very short amount of time. But he's the first coach I ever really had who took me aside and really reworked my windup and gave me an idea of what I should work toward. I performed well for him. I think I was on the verge of being released in my second year, and I pitched really well for him in relief, actually, enough to get me another look the next year, which I went and did another good job, this time as a starter. And that would have been in 1972 in low A Midwest League. But Fred Waters, I look at him and I think he's the best manager I had, at least as far as baseball skills are concerned. He gave me an idea.
Well, you say, Ralph, if I could please, you say that 3 of the 4 St. Paul guys are Hall of Famers. You're a Hall of Famer in our eyes, Tom, even though you may not be enshrined in Cooperstown. I just want to touch upon one last topic because, you are a high character guy, and you've been very gracious for coming on the program. The Good Sports International in Slovakia, the work you're doing with the children there. Could you tell us about it, please? Because I'm sure our listeners would be fascinated.
Well, it's such a long story. I'll try to be brief, but I was actually doing a series of baseball camps in Israel at a kibbutz in Israel, and I did that for 7 years. And I was looking for a place where I could bring members of our congregation, because really the only thing that they needed me in Israel for was my name and the former major league pitcher. And we ran a camp there, and I just had a blast. I had some wonderful lifelong friends out of that whole experience. But I was looking for a place to share that experience with members of our congregation who were sports inclined. And someone told me about a guy who was using baseball to work with kids in Slovakia. So I stopped back in Slovakia through Bratislava on the way back from Israel one year, and I saw what he was doing. He had 100 kids on the field, and he had a baseball camp, and he didn't have a clue what he was doing. So I saw that this is something where I could bring some people, and we could make a difference here. And that happened for about 10 years. That particular guy didn't last more than 3 years. His marriage fell apart. He never returned. But the organization limped along. And in 2004, my wife and I felt like we're in our mid-50s. She's a social worker. I'm a pastor. I thought, this is someplace where, we could give up our whatever pension retirement we're putting into, but maybe we can make a difference and leave a legacy rather than try to salt away something for retirement. And we've got about maybe 15 more years, and we could go over there and make a difference. So we both quit our jobs, and we went over there to work with kids in a country that were experiencing, like many of the former communist countries were experiencing, a lot of confusion. The Western influence was causing the staple of their society, marriages, to fall apart at a ridiculous rate. There was an alarming amount of, I would say challenges, both for parents as well as for kids, that were not being addressed. The governments were still experiencing a lot of the corruption that they still are experiencing, and money wasn't getting into any of the social activities, and there wasn't a desire on the part of the people who have power and money to do something for the little people. Sound familiar?
Oh yeah.
And I grew up in a place in Como Park in St. Paul, Minnesota, that had fantastic community centers. You go down there, you sign up. You don't have to pay them any money. They were funded by the government. They put coaches together with officials and umpires, and you'd go down there and play. Whether you were the best player or the worst player, you'd get on a team, and then, of course, if you'd play a league, play a season, and then you'd have a traveling team that was made up of the better players, and they'd get on to play in different communities and maybe outside the area. And that's how I grew up, and I benefited from that. And I thought, well, we could create that. So I basically went there and started with my wife. We took what existed of good sports, and we energized it, found a club room. We started organizing activities like a community center, charging nothing for people's participation, getting anybody who wants to participate, whatever their background is, whatever their belief system is. We're a faith-based organization, but we don't discriminate against anybody for any reason. Everybody's welcome to come. Kids who come to the program now, for some of them who are really in toxic situations at home, we're their family. For others, we're their second family. And we've created an environment that gives the kids an alternative after school that they didn't have before.
Are you a nonprofit organization?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit organization, and the only reason we can offer this to the kids for free is because we raise funds.
Okay, now, if people like your story, and I do, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can go to our website. I mean, we have a kind of an old, outdated website that was created on a Mac, and now that program doesn't exist anymore, so I'm trying to figure out how I can update it. But it still gives information about how people can participate, and they can participate in a number of ways. Financially, of course, that's an easy way. Writing a check is easy. But if they want to come over and help out, or if they've got equipment, or if there's ways in which they can contribute to something like this, all I know is it's making a difference. And we've expanded to a second location. We want to hire our fifth full-time staff person. We're hoping to do that in June. So we've got a little bit of a financial commitment there. But when I say hire somebody, guys, I'm not talking about big dollars here. I'm talking about $15,000 a year. Out of which they'll pay 40% in taxes. So they'll take home about $800 a year. So it's not like they're living high on the hog. That's what it takes to hire somebody full-time there. So it's not a huge ask, but it is something that makes a difference in lives. And we're looking at our fifth full-time staff person that we want to hire. So there's the financial end of things, but I was just in Florida with a spring trip for one of the local universities up here, recruiting ball players, softball gals, baseball guys to come over and spend a summer and make a difference, influence these kids.
Well, you're making a difference.
One of the best things we can do for those kids over there is inspire them and motivate them to learn English. If they learn English,
your story. Go ahead. I'm so sorry. Your story is.
Well, if they learn English, it's their way out. It's their way out of the structure that keeps them stuck. And the vast majority of people that we work with live below the poverty line, even for Slovakia. And the last time we checked, 80% of the families that the kids come from are broken. They're living in single parents.
You were definitely leaving. I'm sorry, Tom. You're definitely leaving a legacy that you and Debbie can be proud of. Why don't you, I'm going to piggyback on what Ralph said, why don't you give our podcast listeners a phone number which they can call? if they
Well,
do.
I'll give you a phone
Email
number, and I'll
address.
give you that old outdated website, which still has a way for people to get involved. It's the go, the number 4, and sk.org. Go 4, the number 4, sk.org. That's go4sk.org. And my phone number is.
Yes, go ahead.
And my phone number is 612-735-5775. And that works as long as I'm in the U.S. When I'm over in Slovakia, which is about 40 to 50% of the time, we have another number that they can reach me at. But I think the best thing to do is just go to the website, go4sk.org.
Great. And I hope everyone who has heard this podcast, if you want to make and certainly we're not telling you what kind of denomination amount to contribute if those are your druthers, but this is a man who is doing work that totally transcends whatever success he had as a Major League Baseball pitcher, and he clearly had a lot of success doing that. Tom, is there just one other thing you want to impart before you leave us? Any commercial, anything you want to tell the listeners that you haven't already done?
Well, I first of all want to just say, Doug, I'm so grateful for the way, and I've thanked you a number of times on emails, but I want to say it publicly. Thank you, and thank you, Ralph, for taking up this cause and caring about it.
Thank you for being so articulate and free with your time. We're very appreciative. Thanks for being a great guest.
He's not finished praising us, Ralph. Let him keep talking.
No.
Anytime,
he thanked us. I wanted to thank him, Doug. They taught us that at Joseph Pulitzer. You got to thank.
Well, I thank you guys for giving a voice to a lot of people who don't have any way or can't even figure out a way to get a voice to make an issue. And it's really hard to argue for yourself. It comes across whiny and a little bit irritating. But the fact that you've stepped into the gap and given us a voice means a lot to us, and I'm really, really grateful for it.
And we're very, very grateful for having had the opportunity, albeit for a small 40 or so minutes, to visit with Pastor Tom Johnson, the former Major League pitcher for the Minnesota Twins, who's now a pastor out in Slovakia. Tom, again, it's been a real pleasure. Please keep in touch, and if your schedule allows, please consider coming on back to the show.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, that was Pastor Tom Johnson, ladies and gentlemen. And Ralph, tremendous high character guy.
As are you, my friend. I want you to know that you're well appreciated for the work you're doing. And I told you that last week, and I'll tell you that again. Don't lose sight of that.
Well, listen, some people want their earthly rewards. I'll take them, I'll take the spiritual ones. And I'm going to quote the late great President Grover Cleveland, whose epitaph was what he said, his final words before he passed on. He said, "I have tried so hard to do right." And that's all I'm trying to do. And I suspect that's all Tom Johnson has been trying to do. And as we both know, I don't know what Rob Manfred and Tony Clark are trying to do, but it's certainly not helping retired men who have no voice. So,
is there
on behalf
any way
of,
we can find a way to circumvent those two people to deal with, because they seem to be impossible. They put
if I could get anyone at all from the players' union. I mean, Steve Rogers, there's no love lost between us, But if I could get any other special assistant, like, for example, former San Francisco Giant outfielder Jeffrey Hammonds, or Pastor Tom alluded to Dave Winfield, he's a special assistant. The former New York Met and Pittsburgh Pirate third baseman Bobby Bonilla. I would welcome having a conversation with anybody, but the fact is they don't want to talk about this.
Well, I think they think it's going to come out of their pocket. And the truth of the matter is, it isn't. Their benefits are set, and they're set in gold and in stone, and the association is so well funded that them not giving well-deserved money to these guys is really sinful. I mean, you could talk about spiritual, but there has to be some legal thing that we can do to bring it to the attention of the Attorney General, Supreme Court. I don't know what it is, but, they showed good intent by giving bucks to former Negro League players who never ever saw the major leagues through no fault of their own off times, but they were plenty good to those folks, as well they should have been, given the circumstance. Why are they? We're talking about lives. We're talking about people who are impoverished, people
and that
who
is
are
precisely, and that is precisely the argument that I have written about. If anyone wants to go back to last spring, the May issue of the New York State Bar Entertainment Sports Law Journal, I said you cannot give benefits that are similar or in the large, vast majority of cases better to people who never had an employment contractual relationship with MLB, with this employer. You can't give them, those men, however well-intended you are, you can't give them those benefits and then hose the pre-1980 players. And by the way, just for good measure, there are also 215 other men who aren't getting one plug nickel. At least Pastor Tom gets something. But as you know, Ralph, the man they trotted out, the Dodgers, before Game 2 of last year's World Series, Roy Gleason, he gets nothing. He gets nothing.
By the way, I want to correct you on one thing. There are journalists sticking up for your cause. You pointed out, and I came across it subsequently. Ken Rosenthal wrote a terrific column. Major League Players Association, Tony the $2 million man, Clark, who refuses to go to bat for 644 retirees.
Well, to be fair, please tell our audience, or I will, that that was what I forwarded you. That was not the article that you're alluding to in Ken Rosenthal's phenomenal, and I might even say brilliant piece recently in the great The Athletic magazine. I have been calling Tony Clark the $2 million man because, ladies and gentlemen, if you did not know, Tony Clark, on top of his Major League Baseball pension, receives $1.9 million, an annual salary of $1.9 million, and including benefits, it brings him slightly over $2.1 million. And his union, the Major League Baseball Players Association, God forbid you actually call them a union, they correct you, they're an association. His association has, as of last year, and I'm sure this has been documented elsewhere on some of the other programs in the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, a pension and welfare benefits fund that is approaching $3 billion. The national pastime and is doing very well financially. And I don't want people to think, oh, Gladstone hates unions, Gladstone hates Clark. No, I don't hate Mr. Clark. I've never met Mr. Clark. I don't like what Mr. Clark is doing to men who, in many cases, can't afford health insurance coverage, who are defaulting on their mortgages, who are going into Chapter 11. And if we had perhaps a different union leader, someone with more compassion, someone with more humanity, like the late Michael Weiner. And by the way, that's the central focus of Mr. Rosenthal's article, that perhaps it's time that Tony Clark should go, but because he may not be doing, in the eyes of not a few sports agents and players in his own union, he may be doing more of them a disservice by some of the recent things that the ill-timed actions that he's been doing. For example, the whole debate between Commissioner Manfred and Mr. Clark over stoppage of play. The whole idea that there is collusion between the owners in not giving free agents the money that they are entitled to. You're not entitled to anything in this life. You're entitled to work for what the market demands, and yes, the market is paying men like Clayton Kershaw $31.17 million, but there's no collusion. I mean, that's just ridiculous. All of these questions that we are raising are fodder for future podcasts. We hope you've enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
We hope we brought you a great guest
and
for
turn it inside out. Let me tell you, because there's so many intricate parts about this. I just want to ask you this in closing this podcast: is life a microcosm of baseball, or is baseball a microcosm of life?
You know what? I'm going to quote a Facebook blogger about this. And I don't recall the gentleman's name, but he actually responded in much the same way I am about to. Baseball is a microcosm of life.
Okay.
So, on that note, we thank you for tuning in. We wish you well. We hope you enjoyed this little interview, as it were, this freewheeling discussion with Pastor Tom Johnson. And
hey, not only that, Doug, the audience enjoyed your company. So,
well, you're being
thank you
very
for being
gracious.
so communicative. Thanks to the work that you do.
Ralph, listen, a lot of podcast hosts, and you know this to be true, and I'm not trying to suck up because I have no reason to do that. A lot of individuals really respect the work that you've done. You've given forums to important stories. You've given outlets to men who, as Pastor Tom said, would be voiceless without you providing the services that you do. And on behalf of Ziggy, and on behalf of myself, thank you again, and we'll see you next time, or we hope you'll tune in next time to A Bitter Cup of Coffee, the podcast. Bye, everybody.
Adios, folks. See you next week.
Ralph, you there?
I'm here. Are you there, Doug?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, thanks a
You
lot.
there?
And
Tom, were you holding all this time?
Sure.
Oh my gosh!
I wanted to hear you wrap it up. No, I'm impressed. What's the name of the podcast?
It's basically the title of my book, A Bitter Cup of Coffee.
Bitter Cup of Coffee.
A Bitter Cup of Coffee, the podcast.
Cool.
So now we know the priest is a heavy breather. I'm glad we.
Oh, really?
I'm glad you weren't doing that breathing while we were on live.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for everything you're doing. I appreciate it. And I hope we can meet up sometime.
That would be great. It truly would be. And I hope this. I mean, you were. I could not have asked for a better guest. And I'm sure if he was on the line, Ralph would agree. You were just. I mean, some of the stuff you said, like this life, your second career, as it were, calling you, not the other way around. I mean, some of the stuff that Ralph and I were saying was a little hokey, but I think that you're leaving a legacy that I can only approach and hope to leave. I mean, my whole legacy, I just want to be a good father and a good husband.
I get it, and we all do what we can, right? I mean, that's the best we can do, and for me, Debbie and I knew we'd never be able to salt away a lot of money. I think the tragedy of what's happening with MLB is, Tony Clark is a little bit of stuff going on there that he's forgetting the history of where he's come from.
Absolutely.
And the oppression that people have experienced, and now he's part of the system that is oppressing others. And you can't judge somebody or look inside a person and try to figure out what's going on. But when you're in a position of power, as a person of color, I'm sure he understood what it was like to be on the receiving end. And I don't know, you wonder how a person can look at a situation like this. And
you've read my stuff. You know that one of the things I have taken him to task for is at the Negro League Museum in Kansas City in June of 2016. He received the coveted Jackie Robinson Lifetime Achievement Award. And, you name an award and you name an honor after such an important social justice pioneer, you better deliver, not only to persons of color, but to everybody. And
to anybody
I just
oppressed.
Think this is,
Yeah, to anybody that's oppressed by a system that has power and takes advantage of that power on the backs of people who participated. I look at the guys, the 643 others. Virtually, I mean, we didn't make any money in baseball.
No,
we had to work jobs. We had to work jobs. When I came up, the minimum was 12. When I left in '79, it was 25, and you couldn't support.
Hey, Ralph, is that you? Ralph?
Hey, this is Hal.
Oh, Hal, I'm so sorry. Hal, I want to introduce you to Pastor Tom Johnson. He was the first guest. This is Doug Gladstone on the initial podcast we had. Pastor Tom, Hal Bach of the Associated Press.
Okay. Hello, Hal.
I guess it's still a part. Well, we never left. Ralph hung up, and Pastor Tom and I were talking offline. But you hold on, and Ralph will be back.
I'm here for the 8 o'clock call.
Yes, I know. That's what Ralph does, Tom. He records all of these things like Alex Trebek. He does 5 episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, lasting 3 weeks. So, listen, we'll have another conversation, but again, thank you so much. I appreciate it. My best regards to Debbie. Have a blessed Good Friday and a happy Easter.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Doug. And great to appreciate it. And Hal, nice to meet you.
Okay, nice to meet you, Pastor.
Okay.
All
Take
right,
care.
Al, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Doug. Hello.
Hello?
Hi, this is Hal.
Al. Sal.
Alan?
Yeah.
How are you?
I've been better, but I'm here. I read your column. Your column was on this new football league.
Yes.
You forgot one of them. You forgot the WLAF, World League of American Football.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's very easy to forget.
Hi, George Case here.
Yeah.
Hello, George.
Hi, George.
Hal.
Hey, hi,
I
guys.
went out with two friends to see an opening game of that, and I never saw such bad football in my life.
It's not the NFL, you know.
No. No, it lasted a year or two, and that half the teams were in Europe, and the thing it's supposed to be a developmental league, and it flopped after, I think, 2 years.
You got a new basketball coach at Pitt.
Oh, yeah. He's supposed to be very, very good.
Who is it, Al? I didn't even hear that.
Jeff Capel.
Okay.
He's been assistant at Duke for the last 7 years, and he has previous.
The host has joined the conference.
He has previous head coaching experience at VCU and I think a little bit at Oklahoma.
Okay, good.
He's supposed to be a very good recruiter.
When did they just announce it? Today? Because I didn't hear it.
Yeah, today. Yeah.
What's that?
Okay.
What's going on?
And the Xavier coach went to Louisville.
Went to Louisville? Oh,
yeah.
Boy.
7 years, 28.
What was the other
7 years, 28 mil.
What was the other change?
Xavier coach went to Louisville, according to Alan.
Yeah, according to everybody. And basically, 6 months ago, he had signed an extension to stay at Xavier for another 5 years.
So I guess they had some kind of a buyout then, right?
Whatever, yeah, who knows? I mean, but, yeah.
Well, they're getting up in the stratosphere with those kind of monies. Jeez.
Yeah.
I mean, that's... Oh.
And David Pitt signed Jeff Capel, who was an assistant under Krzyzewski for the last 7 years. And he helped with a lot of the recruiting, so it can't be worse than Stallings. So that's a plus in itself.
Okay. Who's here, guys? I recognize Alan Buckin.
Yep.
Hi, David's here. I'm here.
Yep. George is here. David's here. Alan's here. Hal's here.
The usual suspects.
The whole gang is here.
The usual suspects, yeah.
Hey, Ralph, I have a quick question to ask you.
Certainly.
On Sunday's show, which was great, George and I were the only ones. What happened?
What do you mean?
We were the only ones besides you. It was just the three of us and Sherry.
Well, I wasn't invited.
Oh.
Yeah, Don Stokes. Don Stokes is here.
Oh, hey, Don's on here too. Hey, Don.
Hey.
Hi, Don.
Hey, Ralph.
David.
Hi, Don.
So what's your point? It was Sherry.
Well, usually we have Alan is on Sundays, and
he couldn't make it Sunday.
Oh, okay.
He was under the weather Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Ralph, you know I'm the scratch for next Tuesday, right?
Yes, you are. I hope it's nothing serious, Hal.
Well, I hope not. We'll see.
Yeah, Ralph. Also, David Nemec left for Australia today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he'll be back on the 12th of April.
Oh, okay. Okay. And
we're setting up a Cleveland show.
Oh, cool.
Because I got a close friend of mine who I've known for forever from college, who's a huge Indians fan. He's from there. He's a season ticket holder. So the three of us are going to discuss the Indians.
Oh, that's very nice. Expansion at Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. But not just for the sake of expansion, quality stuff. I'm real proud of it all.
Well, I've got a good radio guy for you, Alan. When you start talking about the Browns, He's a season ticket holder of the Browns going.
Cleveland Browns?
Yeah.
Why?
Because they're going to win a game one of these days.
Yeah, they're going to win a game, right? Okay.
Is that a promise? I want to hear about the new football league, and
yeah,
we're going to hear that.
We're all excited about that.
Yeah.
Let me push a button. I think you guys know why. Here we go.